It's going to take a while for us to get back, but I would just say this. In the long run, and even in the medium run, you wouldn't want to bet against the American economy. This economy will recover. It may take a while. It may take a period of time. It could stretch through the end of next year. We really don't know.
If the economy reopens and the infection rate surges, what then?
The government would have to reintroduce these social distancing measures, and that you would have another downturn, and that would be bad for confidence. So that's a risk we really want to avoid.
Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell in an interview with 60 Minutes. Joining us now, Director of Economic Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute and author of the book, The American Dream is Not Dead, Michael Strain. He's also a Bloomberg opinion columnist, and his latest piece is entitled, Good Economic News is Coming, and That's Bad. Michael, why don't we start there? What's coming, and why is it bad?
Well, I think that there are two risks from some of the good economic news that I would expect to start coming over the course of the summer. One risk is that news will mislead people. And a lot of this has to do with how economic statistics are put together, but most of it has to do with just how bad things are. So it's quite reasonable to expect, and the Congressional Budget Office is forecasting quarterly economic growth of 25% at an annualized rate in the third quarter, 10% at an annualized rate in the fourth quarter, the unemployment rate to come down by 20% by the end of the year. These numbers sound really spectacular. Even if they happen, and I think there's a very good chance that they will, at the end of the calendar year, the U.S. economy will still be in terrible shape. So part of the challenge is that a lot of this good news is going to be confusing. Another part of the challenge is that the Republican Party and President Trump are going to seize on that challenge, reacting to political incentives to paint that the economy is in great shape. That's going to add to the confusion. All of this, I think, could end up creating a situation where Congress doesn't have the appetite to enact the kinds of economic recovery programs that really will be needed to help American households and workers to get back on their feet and to get the economy back to where it was before the coronavirus pandemic hit. So we could be in a situation where we're doing really, really well over the summer. We're going into the fall with eye-popping GDP growth numbers, plummeting unemployment, but we're still going to be in really, really bad shape, because the second quarter, the spring of this year, was just so bad that you can climb out of that hole quickly, or you can make rapid progress climbing out of the hole, but at the end of the year still be in terrible shape. And we need policy to help workers and businesses, and I'm concerned it'll serve as an obstacle.
Jonathan Lemire.
Michael, I mean, you certainly hit on something that if the economy starts to show signs of growth, signs of progress, certainly the administration is going to sell it as a victory and frame that as the president's reelection pitch, that he built the economy once, quote, and now he's rebuilding it again. But let me ask you, what do you think is needed now, and particularly when it comes to what sort of federal assistance should be provided to state and local governments who are really struggling right now, who may be facing to have no choice but to lay off potentially thousands and thousands of workers?
Yeah, so this is a political hot button, obviously, and I think both sides here have a good point. Republicans on Capitol Hill are reluctant to basically bail out state pension funds. The pension system in Illinois is in particularly bad shape, and an official with that system wrote a letter requesting federal money to shore up that system. And I understand why Republicans don't want to do that, and I think that shouldn't be done. At the same time, states, most of which can't run budget deficits, are in a position where they're going to have to lay off a bunch of workers or cut essential services, or more likely do both, because their tax revenue is going to go down so dramatically as a consequence of the recession. And so I think it's pretty clear that what Congress needs to do is provide several $100 billion to the states to avert those kinds of layoffs that will only make the recession worse, while also putting in place some protections to make sure that that money isn't used to bail out pension funds that have been badly mismanaged for decades.
Caddy.
Michael, does your rosier scenario for the second half of this year depend on medical therapies or getting close to a vaccine? Because if it depends on consumers going back to start consuming again so that businesses can start hiring, consumers don't seem to have that confidence yet. We're not seeing them going back to restaurants or movie theaters or shopping even.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't assume that. And a medical therapy, not even a vaccine, but a drug or ideally 2 or 3 drugs that you could take that would reduce the severity of the infection really could be a game changer and could pull us out of this hole much faster than conventional forecasts or what I discussed earlier would do. I think you kind of hit on it, Katie, actually. So the states are reopening. I think as of this morning, it's 48 states are in some stage of reopening. That's going to show up as positive economic growth over the summer. That's going to pull the unemployment rate down only because we are in such a deep, deep hole in the spring. And so you can climb up a little bit from where we are in the spring and have positive signs of economic life, put economic indicators on an upward trajectory. But it's important not to forget that we're still going to be in a terrible place economically in terms of how businesses and households are doing. So, all you need is improvement. For the economic statistics to show upward movement. But I think you're right that we're not going to be back to where we were on February 1st, certainly not this summer, certainly not this fall, because people are still going to be reluctant to do a lot of the things that they otherwise would do.
Bloomberg opinion columnist Michael Strain, thank you so much for being on the show this morning.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.